So today we're going to be learning about making connections. And a connection is joining different ideas that remind you of something. So when we're reading, there's 3 different types of connections that you can relate to while you're reading a story. One is a text-to-self connection, and this is between the text and a reader's real-life experience. So this is something that happened in your life, that the story that you're reading that you can relate to. Next, we have a text-to-text connection, and this is between a text and other books, movies, or songs. So this is when you're reading a story and you're like, hey, this reminds me of the movie I saw last week, or this reminds me of my favorite song, or something in a different book that I read. The characters were acting the exact same. So that's a text-to-text connection. We have text-to-world connection, and this is between the text that you're reading and the events that are happening in the real world. So this is something that you see on the news or something that you hear on the radio. So it's something that's happening in real life, like a current event or something that has happened in the past, that the story that you're reading, that you can connect to it. Okay, so now there's a certain language that we use when we're making connections when reading. So the text to self, here are 3 examples of different languages that we can use when we're connecting the story to our real life experiences. So the first one says, I can connect to the story because blank. The second one says, this story reminds me of the time I blank. And the third one says, when the character blank, I thought of blank. Text-to-text connection, some language that we can use is, the character in blank reminds me of those in the story blank. The story has the theme of blank, which is similar to the story blank. The problem of the story, which is blank, reminded me of the problem in the story blank. So with the text-to-text connections, you're just relating the current story that you're reading to a different story or book or song that you have read in the past. Or the text to world connections. The first one is, this story reminds me of when I heard blank on the news. The second one is, the issue the character faced is similar to the real world issue of blank. When blank happened in the story, I thought of blank. And this is a current event in your community or in the world. And then the final one says, this part makes me remember blank. So this one you're just connecting to real life world experiences. This might not be something that you personally have experienced, but this is something that you either see on the news, you hear on the radio, you've read in a historical book, stuff like that. When we make connections to the text, this helps us give a deeper meaning to the story, and it also makes us relate to it more. I know that sometimes when I read certain books, like I get a little bored when I read, and I tend to find that when I make these connections, I am more interested in reading the book and seeing what happens next. So this is why we make connections with the text. You can also make connections to the text to relate to the characters in the book and really pull out their emotions and by making connections. I also want to point out that sometimes when we're reading a book, you don't hit all of these connections. Sometimes you might be reading a book and say, oh, I can only make a text-to-self connection, or I can only make a text-to-text connection, or I can only make a text-to-world connection. And that's okay. You don't need to make all 3 connections because one connection is good enough. You can try to make all 3 connections, which is great, but I just want to assure you that it's okay if you don't have all 3 connections while you're reading a story. Okay, so now what I would like you to do is I would like you to hit the link down in the description bar that says online book, and it'll take you to this page. It's called Miss Nelson Has a Field Day, and I want you to, as you read, write down connections that you make with the book, whether it's text to self, text to text, or text to world, and I'm going to do the same. And then after the story is over, I'm going to come back and show you all the connections that I've made. Okay, so after listening to the book, these are the connections I came up with. So the first one was, I was a cheerleader in high school. The football team never won a single game my last year in school. So this helps me relate to the characters in the story about how they might be feeling. They might be feeling defeated and kind of sad that they haven't won any games. Now this one was a text to self connection. My second connection is The Little Giants. It's a movie about a football team coming together to be a good team. The two brothers have a little rivalry and then they make one big team and they come together and they beat the championship. It's actually a really good movie. And this connection helps me determine what it means to be a good team player. So then my last connection is the Super Bowl winning. So I'm a Philadelphia Eagles fan, and the Eagles did have a losing streak for quite a long time, but they finally won a Super Bowl. So this was something that easily could be Googled or looked up online on like a sports news website, and this is a text to world, text to text, and then text to self connection. So now that you see all my connections, I'm going to make a web so it's a little bit easier to figure out which connection goes to text, text to self, or text to world. So here's what my web looks like right now. So I just wrote connections in the middle, then I wrote text to self, text to world. So then I'm going to take my connections that I just showed you previously and I'm just going to rewrite them underneath where they go. So this way it makes it a little bit easier to read and it makes it easier to organize my thoughts. Okay, so here's what it looks like when it's all done. So the text to text connection was the movie The Little Giants, and it really made me think about what it means to be a team player. The text to self was in high school, how I was a cheerleader for a football team that didn't win a single game, and this helped me connect to the feelings of the characters. They might have been feeling defeated and a little sad because they haven't been winning any games. And then the text to world was something that could easily be looked up on a football news page, and it was about the Eagles winning the Super Bowl after having a really bad losing streak. And then after that's all finished, I just want to remind you that not in every book that you're going to have a text to text to world, and text to self. Some books you might just have one, some you might have two, and that's totally okay. You don't need to have all three connections, but as long as you're making connections while you're reading, this can help you stay more engaged in the book, connect to the characters, maybe realize something. So making connections is a very great tool to use while reading.